I think it's great news. I think any more support for us in general would be a great helping hand.
I am planning to go back to work full time, so any help we can get to help that transition back to work. I think it's really, really hard for working mums as well.
Celebrating St Patrick's Day today, obviously, with this group, and it's like finding that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So this actually takes the pressure off with the cost of living crisis and everything that's going on around us.
Parents there delighted by the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's announcement that he's expanding free childcare for working parents in England to cover all under fives.
We will introduce 30 hours of free childcare, not just for 3 and 4-year-olds, but for every single child over the age of 9 months.
At the moment, parents in England can pay up to £14,500 a year to get childcare for 1 and 2-year-olds. It's expensive. In fact, the UK has some of the highest childcare costs in the world. And that means that many parents decide not to go back to work because it's just too costly. But the government wants to change all that, and Jeremy Hunt believes his childcare package will do just that.
So for any parents who are moving into work or want to increase their hours, we will pay the childcare costs up front.
But not everyone's happy. Many nurseries in England say the plans are unworkable and will leave them out of pocket. So, what is the true cost of childcare? I'm Kimberley Leonard, and this is the Sky News Daily. I'm going to be speaking to 2 nursery owners, one who is forced to sell up because of the rising costs, and another who's deeply concerned about staffing levels. But first, here's Sky's political correspondent, Tamara Cohen.
The Chancellor announced that all children from age 9 months can have 33 hours if their parents are both working. Now, because this is a big expansion, it's not going to happen overnight. So all those people with toddlers who are really excited, from next April, so in a year's time, there will be 15 free hours for 2-year-olds, and then it will be the following September, so September 25, that the Chancellor says the whole policy will be brought in. But of course, it all depends on whether the nurseries and childminders can provide it, and currently there aren't enough of them, so they'd need to scale it up significantly.
And not only childcare from the age of 9 months, but Sand also talking about wraparound childcare for school-age children. How is that going to work?
Yeah, so all these measures are really aimed at getting people back into the workplace who are economically inactive. And we do know, I've done quite a few reports about this, that high childcare costs mean a lot of women, particularly women, drop out of the workforce or cut their hours back because they simply can't afford the childcare around it. And then you do end up with a sort of lifelong career penalty there. The gender pay gap opens up at that stage, and many women might want to stay at home, but some just feel forced to because of financial considerations. So the Chancellor also announced that in addition to money for early years, he would put 400 million into making sure that primary schools offer wraparound care, so breakfast clubs and after school clubs that go on from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. to help working parents. So a lot of schools do that already now, but for those that don't, they will get some more money to set them up. Parents will still have to pay for their child to attend, but it's all part of a package of trying to get more women back into the workplace. So I think in general, parents and providers and those who will be doing this childcare applaud the aim, but there's just real questions, particularly for the early years, about how it's going to be implemented. So the finances of this are going to be so key. The Chancellor said it would all cost £4 billion. I mean, I think a lot of those looking at it will say it will cost a lot more in the end.
We have some of the most expensive childcare in the world, don't we? I mean, this is a big deal for the parents if you're looking at it from their side.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's been calls for this for some time. Labour have, over the last few months, been saying we need childcare to run from the end of parental leave at 9 months right up until children start school, because, yes, you get some subsidised hours when children are 3 years old, but what you're supposed to do in the interim, it's before that, when women are going back to work, that they start cutting back their hours, and then you end up unable to get back up to speed. So there's certainly demand for this. Britain's childcare costs are very high. To give you an idea of how high they are, there's a report every year by a charity called Quorum, which surveys local authorities across the country. And full-time childcare now for a child aged under 2 is £14,500 a year. So it's a huge amount. And while they're 1 and 2 years old, you don't get much back from the government. You get the tax back, but it's still very, very expensive. I think everyone agrees that there are huge benefits all round for the workplace, for getting women into the workplace, but also for the children themselves. If it is good, high quality childcare, then it really helps to narrow the disadvantage gap, so that children from disadvantaged backgrounds can have the same opportunities as those whose parents can afford to pay for it. So I think everyone agrees on the benefits, but there's just questions about how quickly this can be ramped up, and whether the sector who are seeing, people who work in childcare do not get paid very much. They work very hard because they don't get, school holidays or anything. So how they're going to encourage people to go and work in these nurseries to set themselves up as childminders, and that's the bit of the puzzle that we haven't quite had an answer to yet.
Now, it's all designed to get, or to even allow, working parents to get back to work. Do we have any stats about how much of a difference it's going to make?
So yesterday, the official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, which are independent from government, said they reckoned about 60,000 women could come back to work or increase their hours as a result. But of course, it has to be delivered first, and it will take a few years to do that.
And what are Labour saying about all of this?
Labour have been saying for a few months now that childcare is going to be a battleground issue at the next election. So they've yet to set out their plans. Have the government nicked their policy and therefore, stolen a march on them? Well, in a way, yes. But I think what's happened now is the government have announced their plans, and Labour will probably announce theirs later in the year, and they now know what the government are offering, so they can offer something perhaps over and above that. So we now have the parties really, really bidding for voters on this issue of childcare. It must be said on the question of what are the sort of considerations, the Chancellor is talking about these free hours for working parents. So it's not for everybody. It's for families where both parents are working at least 16 hours, or if it's a single parent, for one parent working 16 hours. So it will be good for working parents, but not for those who are looking for work or studying or unable to find work. And so if you look at the sort of chart of who will benefit, it is the top best off third of households who will get most of the money, and the people in the lowest income groups who will be unable to get it. So there is a social mobility question there as well, and I wonder whether when Labour announce their plans, they will go for something that's more universal, so not just for working parents but for all parents, and I think that could be a popular offer at the election.
The government's £4 billion investment in childcare will undoubtedly be life-changing for many parents when it eventually comes into full effect in 2025. But what does it all mean for those who are providing the care? This vast expansion of free childcare for all children of working parents under the age of 5 has already prompted warnings from nursery owners.
It's funded, but not free. And I think a lot of parents think it's actually free, but the rate that we get off the government, once the top slice has been taken off by the local authority, falls much, much shorter than is needed by nurseries and childminders to actually function financially properly.
This is Sharon Birch. She owned an award-winning nursery in Hartlepool for 17 years, until earlier this year when the costs forced her out.
We can completely understand that parents will be really happy with receiving the extra support for childcare. However, that needs to be delivered in the right way for us to be sustainable in the future.
This is Steph Barrett, who's a manager of BeBright Pre-School in Lincolnshire, and she feels the same. Why is it so expensive if you've got people who are on a minimum wage and people who are paying huge amounts of money for this service? What are these overheads that all the money goes on?
Well, your staff wages, 75 to 85% of your income goes on staff wages. Then you've got insurance, food, resources, rent, electricity and gas, which has increased massively, business rates, vehicles, if you provide a vehicle transport service, which lots of nurseries do now. We've got teachers. You've got to pay teachers a proper wage. You can't give them a wage that a lot of nursery nurses have to accept. So you've got to pay your staff what they're worth. And there's a huge recruitment drive a dearth of really good quality staff, because people can go and earn more working in supermarkets and warehouses than they can in childcare, because the overheads are so high.
So the money that they're actually promising actually only equates to around 30 pence per child per hour. So we're already in a deficit of around £1 an hour. We're at the deficit of it at the moment. So that 30 pence is not going to help the deficit we are already in. And what's going to happen is there's going to be more pressure on us, because we're going to have to deliver extra funded hours.
So you're running at a loss of £1 for every child per hour?
That's correct, yes. What's happened is the government pledged to increase the funding rate with the amount of time that went on and with inflation. And what's happened is that hasn't been put in place. So we've got, for example, this year, the national living wage increase is around 9 to 10% for most of our staff, yet the funding increase was only 3 to 4%. So there's already a deficit there. So the money isn't there. The funding has never stayed quite in line with the cost of living.
If you're running at a loss, how do you continue?
Both owners are taking a significantly reduced wage. We don't work at we don't receive even minimum wage. We're trying to ensure that our staff get paid first before us. Which is obviously having an impact on our own. We both have mortgages to pay. We both have our own families to support. But we can only do that for so long before the deficit becomes too much. And we have to close the doors. That's the reality of it.
Okay, Sharon, back to you for this one. Is the issue with staffing the ratio, the number of staff to the number of children?
The ratio problem is not a solution, because if you raise staff children to ratios, have you tried looking after 5 toddlers, 1 person? It is an absolute difficulty when they're all live wires, they all want to do different things. And if you raise the ratio, you're diluting the quality and diluting the capability. And is it really going to be that safe?
It's just going to put more stress on the team that we've got here. It's already hard enough to have to be able to manage 4 2-year-olds, let alone 5 2-year-olds.
Well, let me just jump in there and ask you, Stephanie, if you think one adult can look after 5 2-year-olds.
No, absolutely not. And as a parent myself, would I want my 2-year-old to be in with 4 other 2-year-olds and one adult? No, I wouldn't. But it's dangerous to have 5 2-year-olds to 1 adult.
Sharon, tell us a bit more about your story, because you owned a nursery in Hartlepool for 17 years and it was rated outstanding.
Yep, we achieved our outstanding. We won 2 national industry awards, Nursery World Awards. We won Gold Investors and People, lots of business awards. We really provided a really massively brilliant service to our families, struggling in an area of high deprivation, parents from all stratas of society, but really, really engaged, really good service. But because my background is in policing, not childcare, and despite having lots of qualifications, I'm not allowed to manage my own nursery, so I had to employ a manager. Coming out of COVID, there just wasn't the wage, the money there to pay me an income. And you can't strip your staff bare, because they're the ones looking after your children and they're the ones that need to be there. So I was the one that was indispensable, really. I didn't want to close the nursery, although financially, that's what all the figures said. But by stepping away and actually giving the nursery away to my manager, who was perfectly capable of running it, she's been paid throughout. She can have that wage. She can still pay herself that wage. But by running the nursery herself and taking me out of the equation, the nursery can still keep going. And that was an unfortunate decision I had to make. It was either I go or the whole nursery goes.
That must have been a really, really tough decision to make after 17 years.
Absolutely. It was a difficult decision, but in some ways it was an easy decision. I didn't want the nursery to go. We'd done so well, and I certainly didn't want to make 34, 35 people redundant.
What do you think the future looks like for nurseries? Do you think they can survive? And what is the solution here?
Well, nobody's going to go into childcare. It's just so stressful and so restrictive. Not only have you got Ofsted and the local authority, you've got the Health and Safety Executive and food hygiene and many, many other legal bodies that all come and inspect, and it's so heavily regulated and you have to be so highly trained for such a low wage. It's quite bleak. There was over 5,000 nurseries closed last year. We didn't want to be one of those statistics.
We cannot continue offering a child a space on the government-funded hours for only the cost of a cup of coffee. And the answer, I think, is to obviously increase the funding rate that we all receive. It's all very well saying that the government are offering free funding, but that is not free. It comes at a cost. And at the moment, with it being all parents having the impression that it's free and they all have this entitlement to have the free hours, that's then devaluing our role as early years educators. The children in our care all receive an early years education as primary school students do and as secondary school students do, and we should be paid accordingly to that. My staff can get paid more to go and work in some of the local supermarkets to us, and it's a far less stressful job for them. So I can't retain the staff because I can't physically pay them anymore because of the funding we receive. Would you want your child to be, looked after at the cost of a cup of coffee? It's an interesting concept.
My thanks to Tamara Cohen, Steph Barrett and Sharon Birch. This episode was produced by Emma Ray Woodhouse and Alex Eden.